revealing the impossible, the invisible, and the many, many layers behind an image. Taryn Simon has a singular and meticulous approach to fine art photography. If the average picture speaks 1,000 words, one of hers could probably write a book. Her latest show here in Paris explores the symbolism and structures within democracy, and she's in the studio to tell us more. Hello, Taryn, and welcome.
Hi.
Now, that exhibition I mentioned is called The Game at the Almine Rech Gallery here in Paris. It takes iconic, meaningful moments from the recent United States presidential election, and I was very amused to see some McDonald's French fries in one shot. How are they linked to democracy?
Well, it sort of looks at where public attention went in the lead up to the U.S. presidential election, and where that attention fell also kind of defines who and what we are and what we're going to inhabit in many ways. And so I was looking at the distractions and what captured the attention of the broader public. So one was just days before the election, Donald Trump went and, dunked fries in oil, salted them, and served them to drive-through customers at a McDonald's as a sort of media and publicity stunt. And it garnered huge attention. And I got French fries from that very location and assembled them in this bleacher-like fashion for the photograph. But just kind of contemplating that the sort of stagecraft of power and how you have to kind of entertain and move the focus away from what actually matters and what's at stake. And it's those distractions that together form this constellation that assembles a result at this point that seems to have nothing to do with what's actually happening.
A very masterful manipulation of certain symbols, important objects, right? And another piece in the show is the Kleroterion, an interactive installation that allows 5 participants to create a randomized result. Let's take a look at how it works.
The sculpture I made is called Kleroterion, and it's based on surviving fragments of a machine that was devised to create a system whereby early democracy could operate in a non-corruptible way.
So, Taryn, tell us how the Kleroterion works in the context of this exhibition, The Game.
Right. Well, it's looking at how decisions are made and possible alternatives to how decisions could be made, because in those early days of democracy, it was actually imagined as something that all citizens could participate in, and anybody could cast themselves for a position of leadership or to be on a jury. And at that time, that, of course, meant only male citizens. But to imagine that today, you could simply just put yourself into a slot and say you were game to be part of the game, and these balls would drop and kick everybody else out, and the final remaining chip would be the winner, and that could be anyone.
Totally random. Well, another piece in the show, it's a film. It has a quietly mesmerizing effect. It's called Haringey Ballot Count, European Union membership referendum at the Great Hall, Alexandra Palace. It was filmed on June 24th, 2016, a date that many British people will remember as the so-called Brexit vote. We see people there counting ballots in the film. Tell us about your choice of this scene and what it tells us about history with a big H.
Mm-hmm. I think when I look back at that also, because I'm presenting it all these years later, and sometimes you kind of can't see something without that distance, but there's this kind of repetitive gesture and this real banal nature to the setting in which all those votes are counted and placed into these piles of leave and remain, and you have all this paper, and which is so weightless, and yet the result is so heavy. And there's something about that action that in many ways betrays or feels so in contrast to all the activity that led up to that, whether that was motivated by, economic interest, racism, nationalism, whatever it is that kind of sits beneath it all. In the end, the act that sort of differentiates between sides feels so kind of impotent and without any real impact. And yet we all know the following morning there was enormous impact.
And in the following years as well. And as an interdisciplinary artist, your approach can be anthropological, sort of documentary, political. When you take a very analytical, scientific look at our society, the structures that govern it, the rules that we see in some of your images, what do you make of our societal model?
Yeah. I think that's what I'm grappling with, and it's also like, who are we as individuals? What comprises our brains and our decision making and our thinking and the ways we choose to inhabit the world and structure our world? And all these assumptions are just ideas and imaginations of something that could be completely different. And so I feel like my work is always trying to kind of cycle through all of those questions, and not with any answers. I mean, why the moon? Why? What is death? We have all these big questions that we'll never know. But I just try and kind of find the reason, which I know I'll never find, but I keep trying.
And your work involves a lot of research and sometimes administrative tasks, so requesting permission to go certain places, getting access to archives or documentation. We read about that process in the texts that accompany your photographs often. Texts seem to be about as important as the visual for you. What about the texts you find compelling? What sort of stories grab your attention?
Right. I think stories that don't have a clear answer, so gray space, where there's this white noise, and you can kind of have something going in one direction and something going in another, and kind of looking at that space of conflict and trying to understand it and trying to really question every belief and foundation you may have and unearth something new. But it's really what I'm trying to establish is that noise. And it's a feeling more than anything, and that's what I hope the work has.
A previous project of yours explores the primal human rite of passage, which is grief and mourning. For the series An Occupation of Loss, you met with and photographed professional mourners to document bereavements. Then a couple of years later, many people around the world experienced loss on a huge and accelerated scale due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Did that project that you made make you think about loss in a different way before and after the pandemic? How did it affect your view of the project?
Yeah, there was this strange thing that happened after COVID where everybody was experiencing the same disease in different ways, of course, but there was this kind of global mourning that took place around that. And that project is looking at how we process through grief. What are the rituals that we use to manage loss? And how does that change by nation, by economic standing, by geography? And I wanted to see the way different cultures handle that moment of questioning and vulnerability. And then created this performance where there was this cacophony of mourning of all these different ways of inhabiting that space. There's all these different ways of moving through loss. But I wanted to look at what it sort of reveals about the potential of any natural state beyond those levels of learning and programming.
And almost prophesizing, of course, like you say, the universal loss that we would deal with just a couple of years later. Yeah. And we're now living in an era where hundreds of millions of images are being catalogued daily on our phones, in our pockets, eventually in the cloud. Do you think that this onslaught of images means that we have lost our ability to sort of revisit them or find the meaning in them? How do you think the proliferation of smartphones is shaping our relationship with images now?
Right. Well, it's developing almost like a third skin, right? They're other creatures. They're creating other beings. Photography kind of freezes time. It stops the continuum. It makes you pause. It creates something that is completely unreal, but it's absolutely linked to the real because it was documenting something that was actual or you believed to be actual. So it has this very schizophrenic makeup between reality and fiction. And I think when that's kind of taken in this personal diaristic way, which is what we're seeing happening, it creates these kind of invisible beings. And so we now have kind of doubled the global population because everybody has this, avatar of sorts, this invisible being floating around too. So it's us and the ghosts, and then when you take that into political and the implications of that, we're just living on these multiple layers now, and photography plays a huge role in that, and always has since it was ever developed. It has incredible power.
That's something I was going to say. You've always said how powerful photography and imagery can be, but now with AI coming in and perhaps distorting our relationship with photography, do you think it still has the same power it once had?
Well, I think people are aware of the distortion, right? It's like I have to teach my children about if someone calls and has my voice, it may not be me. I mean, these are kind of standard lessons now. So it's like the same thing applies to photography and to images and news feeds and everything else. So you at least are developing critical minds, hopefully. But obviously, yeah, the levels of manipulation are scary.
And where do you think it will go in the future?
I have no idea. Well, I think we're probably going to end up being a future of rats. We'll probably disappear, but I hope not.
Self-generating images as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Taryn Simon, thank you so much for joining us today. We're wrapping up the show with more contemporary art here in Paris with a multi-sensory installation from artist and composer Céleste Boursier-Mougenot. He's behind a poetic and watery landscape featuring porcelain sculptures and a tinkling melody. That's at the Bourse de Commerce. We'll leave you with a preview. Otherwise, do check in with us here next time on Arts 24. There's more news coming up just after this.